Hi everybody, my name is Sam Pedro and welcome to today's video. I'm going to be trying something new today. If you are new to my channel, most of the videos I've been posting have been about reading and specifically individual books. So the process was, I'd read a book, do a video about that specific book, kind of like a book review / book summary, and sharing a few highlights from that book. And I've had a lot of fun with it. I've done something like 40 plus book videos like that. But I'm going to start today something new, kind of a transition away from videos about specific books. And the reason why is I'm reading a lot, and these videos take so much time, and I just can't get to all the books that I'm reading. And so there are dozens and dozens and dozens of books just from the past few months that I've read, and I just haven't had time to make a video for. And so going forward, what I'm going to do is I want to do a more reoccurring video twice a week where I'm sharing more about the ideas, the big ideas that I'm reading about, and I guess idea extraction from books. So with the thought that each video will be about a specific idea and maybe where I'm sharing kind of what I'm reading the past few days. And I'm really excited about this format. I think this will be really good for me and hopefully for you as the viewer. And then I'll probably do videos about specific individual books if I really, really love that book and I feel like it deserves its own video. So for today's video, I guess episode 1 of this new format, I'm going to be talking about the idea of getting more out of books and more out of reading. And this comes from a book I'm currently reading. So I'm reading Abraham Lincoln, The Prairie Years and the War Years by Carl Sandburg. And it's the second book I've read recently about Abraham Lincoln. I'm having a lot of fun reading about him. I'm learning a lot. And in this book, it talks about Abraham Lincoln as a kid and as a youth. And it's giving these character sketches of who he was and what he was like. And I find that really fascinating. This man who grew up to become one of the great leaders in world history, what was he doing as a kid that maybe was different that set him on a course for that greatness? And so how the book approaches talking about Abraham Lincoln as a kid is it's giving all these accounts of people who knew him. And one of them really stuck out to me. And so all of them are talking about him as a bookish kind of guy who's just reading a lot. They'd find him sprawled out on the floor in front of the fireplace reading books constantly. But I believe it was a cousin who just made this phrase, this sentence that just really stuck out to me. He just said, Abraham Lincoln could get more out of books than other people. And that just really hit me, and it made me really think about the fact and the idea that two people reading the same book and one of them could get a lot more out of that book than the other. And it's something I've always wanted to be able to do, is to not necessarily in a competitive sense, but for my own improvement of getting more out of a book. If I'm reading a book, I want to be able to get as much out of that book as I need to. And throughout my reading life, there's been times where I'm really good at that, where I'm really focused either with taking notes or with trying to really learn the principles from these books. But then there are times where I'm just not as focused, and maybe I'm just reading for entertainment, which isn't really necessarily a bad thing. But I do think getting more out of books is a very active approach, and it requires effort. And so I was thinking about, what are some of the skills behind that, about the thought of getting more out of books than other people. And it actually made me think of a book I just read about Abraham Lincoln called Team of Rivals. And that book shares an account of a lawyer who used to work with Abraham Lincoln. And he talks about going into Lincoln's study and just seeing Lincoln reading all the time. And he said that he read hard things. And so he would go and read, the great classics of world literature. And he specifically called out, I think, Euclid's Geometry. And he said he walked in, Abraham Lincoln's reading this book about math, and, he has his notes, and he's redoing all the proofs until he knew all of the proofs in that book. And I think that's a very deliberate mindset and mentality is, I'm going to read this book, and I'm not going to put it down until I know everything it has. I'm not going to go on to the next chapter until I understand this chapter that I'm currently in. And, you know, it made me think so I studied accounting and I got my master's in accounting. And the times where I was doing really great in my program is when I had that mentality. So I'm not going to go on to the next problem until I know how to figure this one out, and whether it takes, you know, hours or whatever it is. And so I think Abraham Lincoln had that mentality that if I'm going to open this book, I'm going to make sure I know what's inside it. And I think there's a spectrum, right? I think that can be to a fault. You don't need to know everything. You don't have time to learn everything. But there's also the other side of that spectrum where, you know, you're just casually reading and you're not picking up anything. So I'm still trying to find out where that balance is between those two. But I'm going to try approach reading, you know, the next few books I pick up with that mindset of I'm not going to move on to the next chapter till I feel like I at least know. And if someone were to ask me, hey, what was this about, this specific chapter, that I could give them, you know, a quick summary of that chapter. The next idea I want to bring up with this, I'll call it the Matt Morris technique. I recently watched a video, and I'll link it in the description, by a guy named Matt Morris, I believe. Yeah, and he shares his technique for reading and getting more out of books, and he said he's been doing this for 10 years. But what he does is when he's reading a book, he has a journal, and then he has his book. And so when he's going and he's reading the book, and he makes a highlight, he immediately opens his journal, and he writes down that highlighted passage, you know, verbatim, and just goes through the book like that. And then when he's finished reading that book, he goes back to his journal and he rereads all of the I guess the highlights he had read. And then he highlights the best highlights, if that makes sense. And he says through this process, he cements, you know, that learning from books. And I don't know what he does after he's gone through his highlights and he's highlighted his highlights. I don't know if he's memorizing it or just the process of writing it and then rereading it and then highlighting again the best stuff. I don't know if just through that process is enough for him to get the most out of the books, but he's been doing this for 10 years and he speaks highly of it. And so I'm going to transition to that. I'm going to try that for the next few months, doing a better job at taking notes, writing the notes, and going back to my notes. And so here are just a few ideas about getting more out of books. Let me know. I know there are so many techniques out there. There's scientific techniques. There's, you know, opinions about how to get more out of reading. But I'm curious to know what you guys think. So share in the comments below. Are there techniques that have worked for you? Are there things you've heard of that you want to try? I'd very much like this new format of this show to kind of be opening up a dialogue and learning together. But let me know in the comments your thoughts about getting more out of books. And thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.